Going on, guys, welcome back to this video. Today we're doing TryHackMe and we're gonna pick up where we left the last time. So it's gonna be the security engineer track, and today we're doing threat modeling. Now, threat modeling is a completely theoretical room. There is no CTF, it's only blue team knowledge. So what we are going to do, guys, we're going to explain to you what is threat modeling and one of the most important frameworks of threat modeling or threat intelligence, which is the MITRE ATT&CK. So threat modeling, guys, there are many frameworks for threat modeling. What we're going to do, we're going to explain every framework separately. So basically, for every framework, we're going to upload a video. So make sure, guys, you understand every single framework. We're not going to rely on the readings laid down in the tasks. We're just going to make sure you understand the concept of threat modeling and how to use the frameworks. Okay. So I explained in my note file, Cyber Threat Intelligence, the concept of threat modeling and threat intelligence previously. So as a reminder, threat modeling is part of threat intelligence, actually. So threat modeling here, it is a way to identify and prioritize security threats. So how do we do that? We simulate the attack scenarios. That's why we use a framework such as MITRE ATT&CK. So basically, in threat modeling, we actually gather information first about the current threats, and we try to map them to our organization's or the company's assets. So when we want to create a threat modeling plan, we have to define the goal here. The goal is to make the organization or the team or the blue team ready to defend possible or potential attacks that may hit the industry or they may hit the company. So basically, that's why we do threat modeling. Now, you may be asking what's the difference between threat modeling and penetration testing. So penetration testing is an actual engagement where the attacker tries to infiltrate the system. In threat modeling, we don't do that. What we do, we study the attacker's techniques, we study the tactics, and we understand the attacker's objectives. We map them to our organization's scenario, or where the organization falls when it comes to the industry. So if the organization is in the finance industry, we study the common attacks that hit the finance industry. Therefore, we identify the current or the potential threats that may hit the organization. So by identifying the threats that may hit the organization, we'll be able to prepare ourselves. So when it comes to creating a threat modeling plan, first you have to define the scope, much like in any pen testing plan, in any plan that could be any IT plan. You have to define the scope. In the scope, we identify what are the systems, the applications, and the networks that will be part of the threat modeling. If we have servers, if we have applications, if we have endpoints, network area storages, all sorts of, even we may test the non-digital assets, such as the security policies. Asset identification. After we define the scope, we identify the assets. So what are our assets here? This includes the information stored by the systems. The information stored by the systems, such as customer information, intellectual property, financial information, all of these are assets. So identify the systems and the assets that are actually processed or maintained by the systems. And then we identify the threats. So basically, depending on what we use in the organization, what technology we use, okay, we try to identify possible threats. Now, the threat landscape is so broad. So you might be asking yourself, how I'm going to identify, it's like searching a needle in the haystack. There are many threats. That's why we use frameworks, threat intelligence and threat modeling framework. An example would be the MITRE ATT&CK, which will be explained in this video. So we take a framework such as MITRE ATT&CK, and then we try to map the techniques and the tactics used by the attackers to our organization's assets. Okay, so to use the threat intelligence frameworks, an example would be, as we said, it is the MITRE ATT&CK. So the MITRE ATT&CK, this is the Navigator. In the Navigator, after we actually identified the assets and scope, we come to the Navigator here. In the Navigator, we identify the type of organization, okay, that we would like to extract threats for, and then we start. Okay, so let's say we want an enterprise. Enterprise is for, let me go back, sorry. So enterprise is for enterprise threats. Here for mobile systems, and this is for industrial control systems. Industrial control systems are the systems that process and operate the power plants, water processing, so on and so forth. So depending on where we are as an organization, we select the layer. So let's select enterprise. So remember guys, why are we doing this? We are doing this to identify the possible threats that may hit the organization. So how do we do that? Not by penetration testing. We're doing that using threat intelligence. And this is a framework that helps you in identifying possible threats that may hit your organization. So what you have to do, you have to use the framework, and you have to map the framework to threats and to the assets you have and the scope you have defined before. We're going to come to the later steps. So let's say there is an example, very nice example laid down in this room. So which is here. Let me tell you guys. So if you scroll down, this is the scenario. So let's take the scenario, okay, as an example and explain it. Nothing is better explained by other than scenario. So there is this organization. The organization you are currently working with is in the financial services industry. So our company is in the finance industry. This is very critical piece of information to define your industry. Given that some known threat groups targeting this industry are, so given these are the threat groups, and this is the technology the organization using, this or this information should be defined earlier while you worked on identifying your assets and the scope. Now, you know that your organization is using Google Cloud Platform. You know that your organization is using an internal banking system, and you know that, or have identified that, your sales team is using customer relationship management system. These are your assets. You have identified them in this step. Now, regularly guys, the assets are not defined for the sake of creating a threat modeling plan. Asset identification is a common step during the development of any security policy or any security program. For example, if you are preparing an incident response plan, if you are creating a compliance and governance plan, if you are creating a complete information security program, you have to identify your assets. So if you were responsible for creating a threat modeling plan, you may be asking the information security department to give you the asset identification, and then depending on the scope, you pick what assets should be modeled or what assets should be protected based on the threat modeling plan. This is as far when it comes to the first two steps. Now we're going to identify the threats with the help of the MITRE ATT&CK. So we know our assets, the technologies, so on and so forth, the programs, the applications, the operating systems, the hardware, the software. We identify them all, okay? And we decided that only these assets will enroll in our threat modeling as part of the scope. And we know that we are in the finance industry. Let's now use the framework here to identify possible threats. Now remember guys, MITRE ATT&CK is a threat intelligence threat modeling framework. So what do we have here? We have techniques and we have tactics. So these are the tactics: reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, execution, persistence. Some of these tactics are actually taken from the cyber kill chain. The cyber kill chain represents the stages the attacker goes through while conducting the cyber attack. For example, Let's take an example here. Discovery. Where is the discovery? The discovery here is normally in the cyber kill chain mapped as the reconnaissance. Persistence, privilege escalation. These are actually part of cyber kill chain. Anyway, these are the tactics. Okay. Now the attacker would seek to actually achieve the tactic. So the attacker might be achieving or trying to achieve reconnaissance. He wants to gather information. The attacker might be in the stage of credential access. He's trying to collect hashes, usernames, passwords from the system that they compromised. So their tactic here is credential access, which represents their objective. Now to achieve these tactics, we have the techniques. These techniques can be used to achieve the said tactic here. Reconnaissance, we have 10 techniques, for example, to achieve the reconnaissance. Privilege escalation, we have 13 techniques to achieve privilege escalation. So for every tactic, we have techniques that are there to actually manifest the objective or the tactic. Okay, so tactics and techniques. Now your job here is to identify what are the possible techniques that the attackers might use against your organization. How are you going to do that? You're going to use the asset identification or the assets we're using. Given that you are in the finance industry, you might be conducting some research to identify the threat groups that have actually targeted finance organizations before. And you're going to identify, again, part of the assets is the information we're trying to protect. These are assets. It doesn't have to be digital. Customer financial data, it could be digital. Transaction records might be in paper. Personally identifiable information could also be as paper records. So also these are considered as your assets. These are your technologies. So given you have identified your technologies and your assets and the industry, and you have conducted some research about what kind of threats, what kind of threat groups that have targeted the finance industry before, you're going to jump here and try to identify what are the possible techniques the attacker might use against you. If you identify the threats or identify the techniques, you will have successfully identified the threats and you can start the mitigation phase. Okay, so we have the selection controls, we have flight controls, and we have technique controls. In selection controls here, we use it for the search. Let's click on the selection control and search for the threat group. So we're interested in finding what APT28 group can use, what techniques they can use against the finance industry. So we put here the search. It could be a threat group. You could be searching for anything other than threat group. You could be searching for a keyword here. Let's say search for Mimikatz. Okay, Metasploit. So Metasploit, as you can see, they have found 3 techniques. Okay, let's go back. Let's search by threat group. So in threat group, as you can see here, we go to threat groups tab and we expand it. As you can see, we have 2 threat groups, APT28 and Sandworm team. Now when we highlight over APT28, as you can see, the relevant techniques that have been proved to be used by this group are highlighted here with this color, with the blue color. So what we're going to do, we want to study this threat group because it has targeted the companies or the organizations industry which we are operating at. So we're going to click on select. As you can see, they have been selected with the border being in purple or red. Sorry, not red, guys. Purple or I cannot say the word. Blue. Okay. So we have the techniques now. Okay. The next thing we want to do, guys, we want to also search for the other threat group, which is APT29. We search for this. Keep in mind that when you search for another threat group or you perform another search operation, the already selected techniques won't be erased. They will stay highlighted. Okay, So APT28, we expand thread groups and we select all. As you can see, additional techniques have been highlighted. Let's go now and select carbanac. Thread groups, we have carbanac and we have fin7. I'm gonna select it as well because it is highlighted here. And we have Lazarus group. So Lazarus group, thread groups, and we select Lazarus group. Alright, so by now we have identified all the possible techniques that the attackers might use against our organization. The next step, we have to use the filter. So we're going to close here. We want to filter them. So the filter works by mapping the threats, or the threats or the techniques against your organization. So remember, these are your organization's technologies, and these are your organization's assets. Let's use the filter button from the layer controls. We're going to expand the filters from here, and we select the technologies. We're going to first unselect all of them. As you can see, everything is gone. Let's go back now. We have Google Cloud Platform, so we're going to select Google Workspace. And we have online banking platform developed by internal developers. So this online platform might be running on Linux or Windows. We don't have enough information yet. So we're going to select Linux, Windows, Mac, and network. And lastly, we have a customer relationship management system. So most probably it is hosted on a software as service solution. So we're going to use SaaS. And now we have filtered according to our environment. Lastly, we have the critical assets. Okay, now these are the techniques that the attackers can use against the organization. So now what we can do here, we can just download them as JSON, or we can here export to Excel with this. Okay, so export to Excel or download layer as JSON. We can just download them. We can also highlight them. We use technique controls here to highlight the selected techniques. For example, I can click on data transfer size, right click, and I can perform specific operations such as select, remove the selection only on this technique. I can add annotations, and from the colors I can give colors for this. As you can see, they are highlighted as red. I can put another color. You can select the color from here. And here the scoring, comments. If you want to put annotations, I recommend you guys to put annotation. If you don't need to put annotations or comments, I recommend you guys to use the annotation per technique, not on all of them. So you can select a technique, for example, right click and add an annotation. Select annotated. Okay, and from here we're gonna, where is the annotation? This is metadata and this is the comments. So let's say application window discovery to be reassessed, and this will show up when we export them. Now let's export as Excel, and now we click on downloads. Let's take a look at the file. As you can see here, guys, the techniques have been exported. Alright, so I know now what kind of techniques the attackers might use against my organization. What is the next step? We're gonna stop here. We're gonna next identify the vulnerabilities and prioritize the risks. So based on the techniques here, we're going to map them to our organization and see our stance against every single technique. For example, every technique has an ID, right? So this is drive-by compromise. Let's select another one. Okay, so screen capture, and we have video capture. As you can see, for every single one we have comment to be reassessed. So You can check also, let's go back to the file. Enable editing. As you can see, the comments are here. Alright, now the next step, again, as we spoke earlier, we have to identify what kind of vulnerabilities and what are the mitigations. Alright, there is another thing here, which is the sub technique. I suspect it is under, these are the filters. Yeah, expand sub techniques. So the sub techniques are techniques under the main techniques we selected. For example, as you can see here, we have I'm trying to see which techniques from the ones we selected. Yeah, so Windows Management Instrumentation Event Subscription had a sub-technique, exploitation for privileged escalation. So you can also export these as well. OS credential dumping from DSync attack. This is Windows privilege escalation technique that, if successfully performed, it will result in credential dumping of the OS, LSAS member entity S. These are sub techniques. You can also export them when you finish. You can also go back and collapse them and go back to the main view. So now we finished selecting the techniques. Let's now go to MITRE ATT&CK, and this is the main site. If we search here, okay, and when you want to get details about specific technique, oh, we have them here. For example, under initial access, drive-by compromise. So in the initial access, there is drive-by compromise. As you can see, the ID has been popped up, T1189. Click on this one. As you can see, there are explanations about the technique. And here, brief overview of the technique. As you can see, it doesn't have sub-techniques. Tactic is initial access. It is under initial access. It means that drive-by compromise is a technique used by an attacker to get an initial access. These are the technologies that are susceptible to this attack. Contributors, thanks to them, version, created, last modified. Now, let's scroll down and we see procedural examples. Here it shows you guys who are the threat groups that have previously used this technique. Now, you might be conducting your threat intelligence based on threat groups, as we did a while ago on the Navigator, or you might be interested in specific techniques. Okay, if you are interested in specific techniques and who might be using them, as far as attacker groups are concerned, you might use the search by technique. Scrolling down again, we see here the mitigations. What can you do to protect or to prevent against this attack? And detection. How do you detect this attack is taking place? So all of these steps are part of your analyze vulnerabilities and prioritize risks. Develop and implement countermeasures. You can get the assistance from the mitigations to develop the countermeasures. And lastly, to monitor and evaluate, you can also take a look at how to detect this attack. It's not sufficient to implement the mitigations. You have to implement security controls that detect this attack. Okay, so you might be working with the IT team or the SIEM administrators who are operating the SIEM solutions. If you want, from here as well, we can search the technique. For example, external remote services T1133. So search here T1133. As you can see, we have, yeah, external remote services. right? You can also perform the search here if you want. Let's deselect, and oh wait, let's close this, the background. Okay, so let's go back here to the search and search for T1133. So T1133 T1133, yes. So what do we have here? So you can search by name, ATT&CK ID, description, data sources. Yeah, so we have these techniques, and this is the one we want. View, it opens the website. So you can either use the site or use the Navigator. If you want to export the data, use the Navigator. If you're just researching, you can use the site. It doesn't matter. So what else do we have to do? Okay, let's go now and answer the questions. How many MITRE ATT&CK techniques are attributed to APT33? Let me show you guys how to answer this question. So we're going to take the group and search with it. We have threat groups 2. Going to select APT33, select, and we have these techniques. Are we going to count them? No. We're just going to look at the X button from here, and it says 31 techniques. This is the answer. Upon applying the last platform filter, how many techniques are under the discovery tactic? So keep this as is, close, go to filters, and unselect all, select last. We're going to have, so how many techniques? One more time. It should show up here, but it didn't. Let's okay, let's reload from start over to enterprise, and we search for APT33, select all as a threat group, and we highlight them with red, and then we filter using, we keep last, so upon applying the last platform filter, how many techniques under the discovery? So discovery, we have 13, which answers your question. In the next upcoming videos, we're going to explain more threat intelligence frameworks such as Dread, Stride, and Pasta. So I hope you guys liked the video, and I will see you later.